For too long, he says, others have told our story. There is no anger in his tone, only a kind of measured resolve. He pledges to support the creation of a Pan-African radio and television network on Burkinabè soil, a platform to reclaim narratives, to challenge distortions, to speak in a voice unfiltered by distance or bias. The applause this time is louder, perhaps because many in the room recognize the echo of their own frustration, the feeling of being misrepresented, misunderstood, misnamed. Then comes the pivot, from storytelling to nation building, from identity to labor. Traoré outlines the domains where Burkina Faso seeks partnership: agriculture, agro-processing, energy, real estate, emerging industries. He gestures lightly, as if pointing to landscapes just beyond the horizon. He speaks of transformation, not as a dream, but as a project already underway. And then, with the simplicity of someone making a practical observation rather than a grand declaration, he says, "It is possible for Africa to feed the world." The phrase hangs for a second, almost too large for the room. Some nod slowly, some smile. A few sit still, weighing the enormity of the claim. Outside these walls, Burkina remains a country wounded by conflict, navigating economic strain, caught between global powers. Inside, however, the sentence feels like a spark, perhaps improbable, perhaps bold, but undeniably vivid, as he speaks of changing laws to protect investments and ensure social cohesion. He does not avoid the realities facing his nation. The conflict in the north, the turbulence across the Sahel, the struggle to regain control of territory, all linger beneath his words, like shadows stretching across afternoon light. Yet he frames them not as endings, but as battles within a longer journey: endurance, reconstruction, sovereignty. These are his anchors. The crowd listens with an unusual stillness. It is not the stillness of agreement, nor of obedience. It is the stillness of encounter between a leader shaping a narrative of continental dignity and a diaspora searching for a place to belong without apology. Then slowly, the mood shifts again. Traoré speaks of unity, of the need for Africans to clasp hands across generations and borders. He calls for solidarity against forces, historic and current, that fracture the continent. He invokes the memory of ancestors who endured what should have been unendurable, and he insists that the spirit which survived those chapters still lives. His tone remains level, not fiery, yet the room absorbs the weight of the idea that resilience is not merely a past tense, but a present demand. The applause that follows is long, rolling, layered with feeling. Some visitors rise to their feet, others bow their heads. There is hope in the room, yes, but also complexity. A homecoming can illuminate, but it can also unsettle. Belonging can warm, but it can also question. And promises, especially large ones, carry obligations on both sides. As Traoré steps back from the podium, the hall exhales. Outside, the sun shifts higher, painting the city in sharper gold. Inside, visitors trade glances, some moved, some curious, some quietly cautious. The story has begun, but its direction remains uncertain. And that uncertainty, beautiful, dangerous, necessary, breathes through every corner of the room. The applause softens, then settles into a gentle murmur as a woman in a flowing dress the color of deep earth steps towards the podium. She moves with the steady composure of someone who has carried stories all her life. When she speaks, her voice is warm, textured, almost melodic, an unexpected counterpoint to the charged air. "We were here last year," she begins. "There were 130 of us. This year we are 4 times that number." The audience stirs, some smiling, some nodding, recognizing the truth behind the words. This return is not an accident. It is a pull, slow at first, then gathering momentum like a current finding its course. "We took your instructions seriously," she continues. "You asked us to be ambassadors of Burkina Faso, and we became just that." Her tone carries no boastfulness, only conviction. She describes the skepticism they faced abroad, warnings, media portrayals, friends asking whether they had lost their senses. She pauses, letting the weight of that memory settle. And yet, she says softly, "We returned, because truth travels differently from fear." Behind her, the delegation stands, elders with silver hair and dignified posture, young adults determined to reclaim something they were taught to forget, children who sense the meaning of the moment without fully understanding it. Their presence alone feels like a rebuttal to centuries of distance. The speaker shifts, her hands clasping the edge of the podium. "When our ancestors were taken away, all they ever wanted was to come home. 400 years later, no African head of state had called us back." She turns to Traoré. "Until now." A murmur ripples through the hall, half gasp, half affirmation. The words hover like smoke, dense with implication. This is not a political statement for them. It is something older, more intimate, a circle they have spent lifetimes tracing. The scene widens, following the visitors beyond the hall. One of them, a middle-aged woman from Georgia, USA, steps out into the sun, blinking at the brightness. Her grandmother spoke often about Africa, though she never knew which part of the continent their family came from. "Somewhere west," the old woman used to say, tapping her chest. "Somewhere our bones remember." For her, arriving in Burkina Faso feels like walking into a photograph she has seen but never lived. She studies the streets, the red-brown roads, the painted shop signs, the sellers balancing trays of mangoes. She listens to the hum of motorbikes, the laughter of children. Everything feels both foreign and familiar, like a lullaby in a language half forgotten. Later, she will tell her travel companions that she cried not during the speech, but when an elderly Burkinabè woman took her hand outside the airport and said, "Welcome, my daughter." That single sentence broke something open. Inside the hall, the speaker continues. She describes the week of discussions they held in Ouagadougou, Pan-African conversations, she calls them. Topics ranged from media and education to agricultural transformation and cultural tourism. But beneath every conversation ran a single thread: how to rebuild what history tried to fracture. She speaks of resolutions drafted collectively, one calling for a Pan-African television and radio network headquartered in Burkina Faso. "We need to undo the lies," she says. "We need to undo the misinformation. Our children, on the continent and abroad, deserve to know the truth." The hall responds with applause, sharper this time, driven by shared frustration and shared hope. She then turns toward a more surprising theme. "We are here not only to show solidarity," she says with a smile, "but to build connections in every sense of the word. Some of our men may find wives here. Some of our women may find husbands." Laughter rolls through the hall, lightening the moment, grounding the politics in something personal and human. The laughter fades, replaced by a deep stillness as she shifts to gratitude. She speaks of the embassy staff who worked tirelessly to welcome them, of the foreign ministry's coordination, of the warmth they encountered everywhere, from street vendors to taxi drivers to local families who invited them into their homes. Her voice quivers for a moment. "Your hospitality has been magical," she says. "Burkina Faso has shown us who we are." Then, as if placing a stone atop a cairn, she delivers her final words: "We stand with you, not in sentiment, in commitment, in action, in solidarity with a nation that dares to lead." Another wave of applause bursts forth, louder, fuller, rising like a crest. Many stand. Others press their hands to their hearts. The energy swells and fills the room like warm wind. But beneath the rising emotion, another layer forms, one quieter, more complex. Some visitors wonder what returning truly means. Does belonging come from blood, from memory, from land? Can a nation at war with insurgency and political pressure also carry the hopes of a diaspora scattered across continents? What weight must be shared and what weight must be left behind? The camera lingers on their faces. A man wiping his eyes. A teenager gripping a borrowed Burkinabè flag. An elder looking upward as though listening for something only she can hear. They are gathered here in unity, yet each carries a different version of the same question. As the applause fades again, the speaker steps back and the air settles around the weight of everything said and unsaid. A homecoming can heal. A homecoming can expose. A homecoming can demand more than anyone expected. And somewhere in that complexity, the story turns toward its highest tension, a point where emotion meets reality and hope must decide whether it will stand or falter. The warmth of the whole lingers long after the applause fades. Yet, outside, the air feels sharper. The late afternoon sun stretches long shadows across the courtyard, pulling the visitors into a quieter space, one where celebration gives way to reflection. What happened inside was powerful. What happens next will be heavier. Some of the guests step aside beneath the neem trees, speaking in low, contemplative tones. The journey back evokes pride, yes, but it also reopens a long corridor of memory, one lined with brutality, silence, and erasure. A corridor many have spent their lives trying to navigate. Voiceover settles into the scene like a slow breath. History doesn't return quietly. It returns with images, with wounds, with questions too large for anyone gathering to answer. In one corner, a young man from Brazil sits on a concrete ledge, scrolling through photos from the day. He is descended from people who worked sugar plantations in Bahia, from ancestors whose names were never recorded, only numbers in ledgers. For him, Traoré's words about the most resilient people in human history strike deeply. But resilience is a complex inheritance. It empowers, yet it burdens. It celebrates survival, yet demands the confrontation of everything survived. He whispers to a fellow traveler, "If resilience built us, why does the world still break us?" She has no answer, only a soft nod. Across the courtyard, an elder from Jamaica wipes her eyes, recalling the lines about colonization, slavery, and the attempt to erase the brave youth of Africa. She has told these stories to her grandchildren, but hearing them spoken here, under the Burkinabè sun, gives them a weight she never expected. It feels like the land itself is acknowledging what happened. Yet there is a tension too, a paradox. Returning home does not erase the fractures of the present. Inside a shaded pavilion, a Burkinabè historian speaks with a small group of visitors. He explains that memory on the continent is not a single thread, but a mosaic of layered truths, kingdoms that rose and fell, cultures intertwined, betrayals and solidarities, migrations, reunions. The diaspora carries one part of the story. He says, we carry another. Homecoming is about stitching them together, but stitching requires care. He warns gently that memory can be used as a bridge, but also as a shield. When leaders frame history to mobilize unity, the line between empowerment and simplification becomes thin. Not false, but condensed. Not manipulative, but strategic. The visitors listen carefully. They understand that narratives, like nations, are built with intention. Nearby, another group speaks about the media. The woman from the earlier speech gestures passionately, repeating her conviction, we have to undo the lies. But the filmmaker from London raises a different concern. If communication is a weapon, he says softly, who decides where it points? It is not an accusation, only a question, a necessary one. The idea of a Pan-African television network excites many, yet the possibility that it might also become a tool of state power lingers in the air. A tool to unify, yes, but tools can shape or sharpen, heal or cut. The duality is unavoidable. Voice-over threads through their reflections. To reclaim the story is noble. To guard the story is strategic. To control the story is something else entirely. And here lies the dilemma at the heart of all nation building, especially in a region where conflict and politics intertwine. As the sun dips lower, bathing the courtyard in a copper wash, conversations shift again, this time toward responsibility. What does it mean for the diaspora to be invited home? To invest? To settle? To carry the message of a nation in transformation? Some feel energized. They speak of agricultural projects, cultural centers, schools. Others hesitate. They are moved by the welcome, yet uncertain about the infrastructure, the stability, the long fighting in the north. Still others wrestle with a deeper question: can one truly return to a place that never knew you? This tension does not diminish the beauty of the moment. It enriches it, giving it depth, honesty, contours. In the midst of these discussions, a quiet voice emerges from an older man wearing a kufi hat. "When you come home," he says, "you meet not only the land, you meet its struggles." He looks at the visitors gently. "You must be ready for both." His words settle like dust, slow, inevitable. The camera shifts back to the hall, now empty except for a few workers folding chairs. The silence feels heavier than the earlier applause. It carries echoes of everything said and everything withheld. This homecoming is not just emotional. It is political, spiritual, economic, symbolic. It is a doorway into questions that no single leader, no single diaspora, no single nation can answer alone. If unity is the dream, then honesty must be the doorway. If return is the beginning, then responsibility is the road. And if the past is the anchor, then the future asks, who will lift it? The image fades as dust settles over Ouagadougou, coloring the sky in deep violet. And with nightfall comes the question that will shape everything that follows. What happens when memory meets power and when belonging asks for more than hope? Night has settled over Ouagadougou like a soft indigo veil when the conversations turn outward. Beyond the courtyard, beyond Burkina Faso, toward the continent and the world watching from a distance. In the cool evening air, the visitors gather around small tables, their discussions branching into wider geographies, into questions shaped by borders and institutions far larger than any one return journey. Africa's story is never written by one nation alone. Its echoes move through unions, alliances, rivalries, and hopes that cross the map like unseen rivers. At a round table beneath a flickering bulb, an analyst from Senegal speaks softly about the African Union. He describes how the AU has long called the diaspora the sixth region of Africa, a symbolic home for millions who live oceans away. The visitors nod. They had heard this phrase before, but here, under the Sahel sky, it feels different, less ceremonial, more alive, more personal. Another voice adds that the AU views moments like this as rare openings, bridges between continental aspiration and global African identity. Yet even such bridges, he warns, must rest on solid ground. Not far from them, a diplomat from Ghana explains how the fracture with ECOWAS reshaped West Africa's political landscape. When Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger withdrew from the bloc, it sent tremors through the region. A homecoming is beautiful, he says, but sovereignty also has consequences. His tone is not critical, merely factual, the way a cartographer might describe shifting fault lines. The listeners fall silent for a moment. The complexity of the region settles like a shadow across the table. A younger visitor, curious and thoughtful, asks about Europe and the United States. What do they see, she asks, when they watch all of this? A Burkinabè academic answers gently. They see a nation in conflict, a region struggling with insurgency, a government repositioning itself in a world of competing powers. He pauses. But they also see something more symbolic, a narrative of awakening, and that makes them unsure of how to respond. He explains that international partners emphasize security, humanitarian aid, elections, governance. Their concerns are not bossless, but they come from vantage points shaped by global politics. Some fear instability, others mistrust declarations of sovereignty. Still others worry about shifting alliances. These layers create a prism through which Burkina Faso is watched, admired, questioned, scrutinized. The visitors absorb this carefully. The world's gaze is a heavy thing, even when distant. Later in the evening, the conversations return to the central idea pulsing through the entire journey: unity. A South African scholar says quietly, Pan-Africanism is powerful, but it is also fragile. It requires trust, across borders, across histories, across wounds. Someone else responds, perhaps this return is not about erasing those wounds, but facing them together. The group falls into a contemplative silence. The night air is cool now, carrying scents of dust, charcoal fires, and faraway music. In the glow of a Sahel evening, the world feels both near and distant. Nations weigh expectations, unions calculate risks, diasporas search for belonging, and a single country, small on the map, asks to be seen on its own terms. But if the continent is shifting and the world is watching, what future will emerge from a promise made under the Burkinabè sky? Dawn arrives quietly, a pale ribbon of light stretching across the rooftops of Ouagadougou. The city stirs slowly, roosters calling, bicycles creaking along narrow lanes, vendors arranging their stalls as if arranging the day itself. For the visitors, this new morning feels different. The first wave of emotion has settled. What remains now is the question that every homecoming eventually faces. What comes next? On the terrace of the guest house, a small group gathers with steaming cups of tea. They speak softly at first, as though shaping the future requires a gentler tone. A woman from Chicago runs her thumb along the lip of her mug, thinking aloud about agricultural investment. If the soil is this rich, she says, why shouldn't the harvest be ours too? A young Burkinabè entrepreneur nods eagerly, describing irrigation challenges, seed varieties, small-scale processing units. Their ideas intertwine, one offering capital, the other offering knowledge. For a moment, the future feels almost tangible, like a field ready for planting. Nearby, two men discuss the proposed Pan-African media project. They imagine studios lit with warm colors, journalists speaking in accents from across the diaspora, documentaries made by Africans for Africans. Yet another visitor raises a soft caution. Media unites, but it can also divide. Will there be space for debate, for disagreement? The question lingers, not as doubt, but as a quiet commitment to integrity. Later in the morning, the delegation visits a stretch of farmland outside the city. The soil is dark, fertile, cracked only by the long dry season. Farmers greet them with shy smiles. A boy guides a donkey cart across the field, dust swirling behind him like a golden veil. The diaspora visitors watch, imagining possibilities. Drip irrigation, storage facilities, local cooperatives, new markets. Yet the reality stands firm beside their visions. Scarce rainfall, insecurity in northern provinces, limited infrastructure. Hope grows best when rooted in truth. One of the elders voices what many are thinking. Dreams are good, but the path will be hard, harder than speeches allow. A farmer responds with a slow, steady smile. Yes, he says, but hard paths still lead somewhere. By afternoon they sit together again, this time indoors, shielded from the heat. This final gathering feels more grounded, more deliberate. They sketch three possible futures. A future of fulfillment, where diaspora investment transforms local industries, where young Burkinabè find livelihoods at home, where the promise of unity becomes practice rather than poetry. A future of disillusionment, where instability slows projects, where goodwill fades under the weight of bureaucracy or conflict, where the dream of return becomes another story of distance. A future of shared persistence, not perfect, not effortless, but real. A future built from small victories, a school refurbished, a farm revived, a cultural center opened, a bridge of trust strengthened across oceans. Revolutions are not made in declarations. They are made in the everyday work of those who choose to stay and those who choose to return. As the session closes, the room holds a collective breath. No one here expects miracles. Only possibility, difficult, imperfect, but alive. And now, as the visitors prepare to leave, a deeper question rises. Who will turn intention into action when the drums of welcome fall silent? The final evening settles over Ouagadougou like a soft curtain, warm and amber. In the courtyard of the guest house, the visitors gather one last time. Conversations drift gently, lighter now, though edged with a quiet ache. Tomorrow, they will board planes heading west, retracing a route carved by history, but carried this time by choice rather than force. A child plays near the doorway, chasing fireflies. An elder watches him with a tenderness shaped by decades of longing. Across the yard, two young Burkinabè volunteers exchange gifts with members of the delegation, woven bracelets for paperback books, a symbol of two worlds leaning toward each other. Coming home is not an ending, it is the beginning of learning what home requires. The visitors recall the first hours of their arrival, the trembling hand touching Sahel soil, the whispered question, "Is this home?" Now, after all they have seen, the speeches, the farmland, the cautions, the hopes, the answer is more complex than yes or no. Home, they realize, is not a guarantee. It is a relationship, and relationships ask for work, humility, patience, and truth. Some feel ready to return permanently. Others promise to invest from afar. A few admit quietly that they are still unsure, and yet none leave unchanged. As night deepens, the city hums softly, an undercurrent of distant drums and murmured prayers. The visitors rise for a final embrace. A woman from the Caribbean, eyes shining with tears, whispers, "We will be back." A young Burkinabè answers, "We will be waiting." The camera lifts slowly above the courtyard, revealing the city beneath the glow of street lamps, its dust, its struggle, its courage, its quiet defiance. A country small on the map, carrying an outsized hope. If a scattered people can return, can a wounded continent heal? If a new story is written in its own voice, who will ensure it remains honest? And if home is offered with open hands, who will choose to build it stone by stone when the welcome songs fade? The Sahel morning rises in a haze of gold, its dust drifting like soft ash across the Ouagadougou runway. When the aircraft door slides open, a hush falls, brief, fragile, almost sacred. A hand, wrinkled by time and stories unspoken, reaches down to touch the warm earth as if greeting an ancestor. A child beside her whispers, "Is this home?" The wind answers with the distant pulse of drums, low and patient, as though echoing a heartbeat carried across centuries. Faces emerge into the light, cautious, hopeful, searching. They step forward with the weight of 400 years behind them and the uncertainty of a new beginning ahead. And there, standing in the glow of the rising sun, a young man in a brown beret watches silently, steady, composed, a symbol more than a silhouette. His voice breaks the stillness. "Welcome home." The words drift through the crowd like a memory rediscovered, unsettling and comforting in equal measure. For a moment, time folds. Past and present, wound and return, loss and possibility. Here, on this strip of Sahel soil, a story begins. Not only of people coming back, but of a continent asking what home truly means after centuries of separation. The hall is alive long before the speeches begin. Light filters through high windows, catching motes of dust suspended in the warm air, turning them into tiny drifting constellations. Rows of chairs fill steadily as the visitors, Afrodescendants, from across the Americas, the Caribbean and Europe, take their places. Some carry small flags, some clutch notebooks, some hold nothing but an expression that sits between reverence and disbelief. This is not a conference. It feels more like a crossing. Outside, Ouagadougou hums with its familiar rhythm, motorbikes weaving through streets of ochre and shadow, vendors arranging fruit in neat pyramids, children racing barefoot across courtyards. But inside this hall, the air is different, charged, expectant, almost trembling. The journey that brought these people here is more than a flight. It is a loop closing, a thread returning to its origin after centuries of fraying. Then he enters. Ibrahim Traoré walks without flourish. No exaggerated gestures, no theatrics. He simply steps forward, the brown beret set firm, the posture calm in a way that quiets the entire room. His presence is not heavy, but it is steady, like a door that will not move in the wind. When he speaks, his voice is low, deliberate, shaped more by conviction than by volume. He begins with gratitude, not the diplomatic kind, but a simpler, almost familial one. He thanks them for coming back to your roots, for crossing oceans of doubt and warnings to stand on this soil. He acknowledges the elders among them, those whose age makes travel difficult, yet who insisted on making the return. And then he repeats the phrase that becomes the spine of this meeting: "Welcome home." A murmur spreads through the crowd, soft and electric. Some eyes water, some hands clasp. The words strike different people differently. For some they confirm a longing carried since childhood, the desire to belong somewhere, without question. For others, they open a door they were afraid to touch, and for a few, they leave a quiet unease. What does it mean to be welcomed home by a land they have never lived in? Traoré continues, his tone firming into purpose. He speaks of the decision to remove financial requirements for Afrodescendants seeking permanent residency. Not a favor, he insists, but a recognition, a bridge across a historical rupture. The room reacts with applause that rises and falls like a tide. The policy itself is symbolic, yet symbols here matter. They have always mattered. He moves on to communication, its power, its weaponry, its consequences.